Two managers, same company, same team size, both doing weekly one-on-one meetings. Manager A walks into every check-in without notes, asks how things are going, listens for about 10 minutes, says, "Great, keep it up," and moves on. 6 months later, review season hits, and they're staring at a blank template, trying to remember what this person actually did this year. Manager B walks in having read the employee's prep form the night before. They already know what's on their mind. They ask one question that opens up the real conversation. They leave with agreed next steps written down. 6 months later, the review practically writes itself because they've been building the evidence the whole time. Same one-on-one meeting cadence, completely different conversation, completely different outcome. The difference isn't talent, it's time. It's whether the communication in that room actually lands. And here's why that gap exists. Most managers were never taught how to have a check-in conversation. They were promoted because they were good at the work, handed a team, and expected to figure out the people part on their own. So they default to what feels natural. Status updates, quick problem solving, a few minutes of small talk, and then both people go back to their desks having talked a lot and communicated almost nothing. That's not a bad manager. That's a manager who was never given a communication framework for this specific conversation. Gallup data shows that 70% of employees don't feel their manager knows what they're actually working on. That's not a documentation failure. That's a communication failure dressed up as a documentation problem. And employee engagement is the single biggest factor in whether someone stays, grows, or quietly checks out. Not the company, not the perks, the manager relationship. And specifically, whether the one-on-one meeting makes people feel seen, heard, and supported. A one-on-one is the most direct communication lever a manager has. And most of them are being run on instinct and good intentions instead of a repeatable structure that actually opens up the real conversation. I'm Dr. Amber. I build frameworks that help people communicate more clearly in the moments that actually matter. And the gap I see most consistently is this. Managers have formal review systems, but no communication system for everything in between. So when review time comes, they're rating from memory instead of from actual evidence. Not fair to the employee, and it's not fair to the manager either. But not being told what's broken isn't even the hard part. You know what actually fixes it? A good one-on-one meeting isn't a status update. It's a conversation that does 5 things in order. It starts by opening the real conversation, not just confirming the agenda. There's a difference between asking what's on the calendar this week and asking, how are you actually feeling about your work right now? The first gets logistics. The second gets what's actually going on. That distinction matters more than most managers realize because what's on the surface and what's actually affecting performance are rarely the same thing. It aligns on what matters, not your priorities for them, their current priorities named in their words. You want to know whether what they think is important matches what you think is important. And if it doesn't, that's the conversation. Misalignment at the priority level is one of the most common sources of frustration on both sides of a management relationship. It surfaces what's actually blocking them, not some vague check-in on how things are going, a direct question about where they're stuck or under-resourced. Most people don't volunteer that they need help. They'll push through until the deadline slips or the quality drops. A direct prompt gives them permission to name it before it becomes a problem. It closes with agreed next steps. Both people leave knowing exactly what happens next and who owns it. This is the step that separates a good conversation from a good outcome. Without it, the meeting was just talk. And after the meeting, you log what matters, not a transcript. The moments worth remembering. A win maybe that they mentioned, a pattern you're noticing, a blocker that shows up again. Over time, that log becomes your evidence base, and your evidence base is what makes reviews, development conversations, and difficult feedback feel rounded instead of guesswork. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because without that system, something else fills the gap. Most organizations do annual or 6-month reviews. Almost none have a system for everything in between. So managers are running one-on-one meetings without a structure, having development conversations without a record, and arriving at formal reviews trying to reconstruct 6 months of performance from memory. And employee engagement suffers because of it. That's where bias sneaks in. Not intentional bias, just recency bias. The last few weeks feel representative. The projects that were visible, they feel more significant. The quiet contributions that happened in month 2, they don't show up because nobody wrote them down. The employee who's been growing steadily gets rated on their most recent stumble instead of their full arc. That's not a character failure. That's just what happens when there's no documentation system running alongside that relationship. And it's not just reviews. It affects development conversations too. If you don't have notes on what someone said they wanted to work on 3 months ago, you can't follow up on it. If you can't follow up on it, the development conversation becomes a one-time event instead of a thread that runs through the whole working relationship. And people notice when their manager doesn't remember what mattered to them. That's the pattern. And it's exactly what I built the Manager One-on-One Check-In Toolkit to interrupt. The Manager One-on-One Check-In Toolkit, it's a communication system for those one-on-one meetings, covering the conversation before, during, and after. 6 forms that cover the full cycle between formal reviews. An employee prep form that goes out before the check-in, so the employee arrives having already reflected on what's working, where they're stuck, and what they need. When you read it beforehand, you walk in prepared instead of spending the first 10 minutes figuring out where they are. A manager check-in form that follows that 5-stage arc. Start, align, explore, support, and close. So every meeting has the same spine, even when that conversation goes somewhere different. The form keeps you tracking engagement over time, not just in the moment. A development conversation worksheet for the quarterly career growth conversation that should be happening separate from the regular check-in. Most managers bolt development onto the end of a status meeting, and then they wonder why it never goes deep. This form gives it its own structure and its own record. A between meetings log for capturing the moments that matter as they happen. The win that came maybe on Tuesday, the pattern you noticed across 2 projects, the thing someone said that you want to come back to, but it's logged in real time instead of reconstructed from memory. A performance support record for the moments when something needs to be named directly. This isn't a disciplinary form. It's a tool for preparing a clear and fair documented conversation before it happens and recording what was actually agreed on. And a review prep summary sheet that pulls it all together before that formal review. If you've been using the other 5 forms, this one practically fills itself. You're not reconstructing the year. You're synthesizing notes that already exist. Every form includes a manager guide explaining when to use it, how to set it up, and what to watch for. The employee prep form and the check-in form, they also include coaching-informed prompts, not just scripts. They're questions that are designed to open up real conversations instead of those surface-level ones. So if your team hears you, but nothing changes, this is what's missing. A one-on-one meeting that runs on instinct, sure, it can still build a decent relationship. But one with a communication structure that builds something more durable, it builds a record. It builds employee engagement that holds over time. And when review season comes, it builds a case for the people who've earned one. The Manager One-on-One Check-In Toolkit is available at talentrefinement.com. I'll leave a link for that in the description. Tell me in the comments, what's the hardest part of running one-on-ones for you right now? Is it the conversation itself, the documentation, or the follow-through? If this gave you something useful, like this video and subscribe. I put out new frameworks like this every week for people who want to lead with intention, not just show up and wing it. And as always, reflect deeply, grow boldly, refine endlessly. I'll see you in the next one.